I hope you like the jam.
Sure. So much. And it is fun.
That's forward, isn't it?
Yeah. Let me click on it again. There you go. There you go. Got it. So this morning, Lauren Poe was supposed to talk. He didn't show. That was my first time ever. It was
And-
new to me. But his mother was in the audience, so she walked up here and showed me a text where he has strep throat and he thought he was supposed to talk on Saturday. Okay. So Roy Hunt kind of talked about his current research.
Who talked? Who?
Roy Hunt?
Something always, there's always something.
About ready? Yeah. Oh, I got 3 minutes. You got 3 minutes.
Classes and next week. Classes, other classes and next week. Yeah,
Circus doesn't have a class next week and you don't have a class next week, but all the rest of the classes are in.
and for the summer, when do they begin?
July 7th. He said when the term starts.
Big hiatus.
Ready to get the boards made and get it out. But I have to wait a month before the classes start, which will be June 7th. Before I can get all the verbs and put in the bulletin. And I'm ready right now. Good afternoon. Let's get ready to get started. People on Zoom, you are muted. Please stay muted. You can ask your questions at the end in the chat and I'll monitor that. People in the room, if you have a cell phone, if you could please silence it, would be greatly appreciated. And we're in for a treat again, just 1 minute, okay? I have thoroughly been enjoying this class among the other classes. So Barbara Oberlander will talk about the women on the quarters.
Yes, can everyone hear me? Okay, good. Thank you all for being here. And this is my last talk on American women on the quarters, although this is the fourth one and there are still 21 others that I might choose from later. But I choose to begin this talk with a scene that is familiar to all of us. I cannot believe there is a single person in this room who has not encountered the Girl Scout sale of cookies. whether they're outside of Publix or outside of other venues. They are a very familiar sight, and I, with the help of my friend Esther, have supplied some Girl Scout cookies in the back. We all have our favorites, whether they're the Thin Mints or the peanut butter or the lemon or the original recipe. But if in your mind, this is what you associate Girl Scouts with, the cookie sales, you are missing the big picture. Here are current statistics on Girl Scout involvement. 56% of women in Congress are Girl Scout alumni. 71% of our current senators are Girl Scout alumni. 53% of women in the House of Representatives. 5 of the 9 current female governors. Every single female Secretary of State is a former Girl Scout. 52% of women in business. 79% who are associated with organizations that represent their beliefs and values. And look at the last one, 86% are registered to vote versus 76% of non-alumni. So Girl Scouts alumni and current members are very impressive. And what is unusual, really, is the founder, Juliette Gordon Low. You are about to meet a woman who you never would have predicted to become the founder of this organization. The quarter honoring her just came out about a month ago, so it is perfect timing for this talk. Juliette McGill Kinsey Gordon was born at the end of October in 1860. This is her birthplace, this gorgeous house in Savannah, Georgia, which you can tour. Here's another view of it. She was the second of 6 children. Her uncle nicknamed her Daisy, and that name stuck. So she was Daisy all her life. These are her parents, Nellie Kinsey Gordon and William Gordon II. Her mother was from Chicago, Illinois. Her father was from a very prominent family who lived in Savannah. They were outstanding members of the community, wealthy. They believed in civic participation and community service. But of course, this is Savannah in 1860, and they owned slaves. So the founder of the Girl Scouts grew up in a household where there were slaves. During the Civil War, her father fought for the Confederacy, and her mother's relatives fought for the Union. Here is an early photo, Daisy with her brothers and sisters in about 1873, so you're looking at a teenager. From left to right, Mabel, the 5th child, Eleanor, who is the oldest, Daisy standing in the back, the second oldest, baby George, Alice the 3rd, and Bill the 4th. She was known as a curious, lively, gregarious child who loved the outdoors. She loved to make up plays and put them on and star in them herself. She loved adventure. During the summer, she and their extended family would go north in Georgia and swim in the Etowah River. But another fact about her is that she had a number of childhood illnesses, and that included ear infections. And one of the major ear infections was misdiagnosed and mistreated. So it started her on a road of hard of hearing, which she dealt with her entire life. Like her girlfriends in Savannah, she was sent to finishing school in both New York and Virginia. And here is a photo of her from that period. She is the one in the middle. That's Juliette, otherwise known as Daisy. Her favorite subject, which might surprise you, was art. And her entire life, she was interested in drawing and sculpting and painting. She came out in society as a debutante in Savannah, and there's a wonderful photograph of her on the left. Look at the hat. No, we're talking about late 19th century hats. And the photo on the right representing her love of animals, particular birds. And there are actually several photos of her holding birds. Then she met and fell in love with William Low. He was the son of a wealthy British businessman. At first, her father was not happy because William Low didn't work. And in her father's view, this was not acceptable. But William's father died, and the son inherited a fortune. At that point, her parents changed their mind about the wedding. And here they are in 1886. This is one of the famous wedding photos. Close up of William and Juliette and the bridesmaids, and look at the hats. Again, the hats are wonderful. There is a description of the gifts he gave her at the wedding. We're talking about diamonds and diamonds and diamonds and silver and incredible things that you might expect the daughter of a wealthy family in Savannah to get from somebody who is also extremely wealthy. Now, it's interesting that one of her biographers has said this was the worst choice she made in her life, was to marry William Low. And you'll see why. This is a marvelous portrait. It hangs in the National Portrait Gallery. It was taken just a year after her marriage. It's beautifully done. They went to live in England on an estate called Wellesbourne House, and there is a photo of her at this time. And Juliette found herself swept into a round of social obligations, hunting parties, fancy dinners, being introduced to the royal family, and she seemed on the surface to adapt to this life fairly well, but she kept coming back to the United States, particularly to Savannah, to see her family and friends. And as time went on, it was clear that the marriage was not going well. And William had left her for another woman in about 1902, and they were talking about a divorce when he died suddenly in 1905. Now, in his will, he had left most of his estate to his mistress, and she was only left with a very small amount. But Juliette contested the will, and she was successful in contesting the will. And so She inherited a lot of money and became a very wealthy woman in her own right, which is going to be important. After he died, she was sort of lost. We're now in 1905. Came back to the United States, visited with friends, decided to travel. She went to India, she went to Egypt, back to England, back to the United States. She's looking for something. And then at a luncheon in London in 1911, she met this man, Robert Baden-Powell, actually General Robert Baden-Powell, who was a war hero in England and something more. Baden-Powell had been a commander during the Second Boer War, which is one of those markers in British history. The Second Boer War in South Africa was horrible. And there was a siege of a very, very famous city, which was known at that time as Mafeking. As a result of this siege, Baden-Powell watched not only British troops who showed incredible bravery, but he also watched a cadre of young boys, and they were called the Cadet Corps. And they went through enemy lines, bringing messages and scouting. And he was impressed by who they were and what they did in such dangerous territory. And this laid the basis in his mind for what he would call scouting. He thought of it as a training for good character, for discipline, for physical fitness, for service to your country. And he believed firmly that this outdoor experience could turn boys into worthy men. So he came back to England and he founded the Boy Scouts. Now, this had just occurred not that many years before when Juliette met him. He had actually published a book called Scouting for Boys by BP, Baden-Powell. And he was amazed. Within a few years of this book being published, scout groups sprung up all over England. It was clear that this was very, very popular with young boys. It was almost like a spontaneous eruption of this. Clearly, the times were right. Well, if there was something for boys, what about girls? He turned to his sister, Agnes, and she founded something called the Girl Guides. This was the counterpart to the Boy Scouts. And again, many chapters very quickly. So Baden-Powell suggested that Juliette work with the Girl Guides in England. She had a better idea. She was going to come back to the United States and establish the Girl Guides in this country. Here they are. So she came back to Savannah in 1912. Now, if you're keeping track, she's 52 years old. And she discovers her calling. She really does at this point. She came back to Savannah. She called her cousin, who was the principal of a girls' school, and said, I've got something for the girls of Savannah and all of America and all the world, and we're going to start it tonight, unquote. And so her cousin gathered some girls from her school. They gathered some daughters of friends. Remember, she was part of a very, very prominent family, and they met. And they devised a whole set of rules, promises, and laws. And the next year, they would officially change the name from Girl Guides to Girl Scouts. And here was the original Girl Scout promise. It was very much based on what Baden-Powell had done for Boy Scouts. On my honor, I will try to serve God and my country, to help people at all times to live by the Girl Scout law. Now, I want to point out that even though God is mentioned from the very beginning, Girl Scouts was non-sectarian. They were open to diverse groups. The law, here it is. I will do my best to be honest and fair, friendly and helpful, considerate and caring, courageous and strong, responsible for what I say and do, to respect myself and others, respect authority, use resources wisely, and make the world a better place, as well as being a sister to every Girl Scout. That's the original promise and law, and it still exists today. So once the organization was started, Juliette Low worked tirelessly to grow the organization. For many years, she used her own money. You know, she was independently wealthy. She did fundraising with people she knew. She was good at public relations. And by the summer of 1912, the Savannah troop was divided into smaller units, and each one had a flower name, and they met on different days of the week. The skills they emphasized were map reading, and if you've ever been to Savannah, I can tell you a map is a good thing to have in the city of Savannah. First aid, cooking, tying knots, sports such as basketball. She adopted the British system of badges when girls were proficient in certain skills, and they created the first national headquarters in Washington, D.C., and she published a handbook, How Girls Can Help Their Country. It was first cousin to the British Girls Guide. And she adopted a symbol. It's a three-leafed trefoil membership pin. You can see it at the top row, far left. And she essentially used much of the design that the Boy Scouts had, but she added the eagle, symbol of the United States, a shield, shaft of arrows, and an olive branch for peace. Now, over the years, look how this has evolved. And so today, what you have is something that looks like a slightly out of line four-leaf clover. That's the one on the bottom row, far right. And so it's been simplified over the years, and they keep working with this. But as you'll see, that one was the very original. By 1914, there were 10 troops registered in Washington, D.C. There were 8 troops in Chicago. By 1917, when we entered World War I, there were 7,000 members of the Girl Scouts. So it grew very, very fast. And World War I, in many ways, was a turning point. Girl Scouts were involved in the war effort. That was one of the things they were asked to do. They sold war bonds. You can see the photo on the left. And it was hard for people in the streets when they were approached by a group of girls in uniform asking you to buy a war bond. It was very hard to say no. They also planted victory gardens. Everyone was planting victory gardens during World War I because, you know, there was the slogan, food will win the war. And you were not supposed to waste food. You were supposed to conserve every bit of food. And people were digging up their rose beds and planting victory gardens. And they helped out with the Red Cross. There were some girls shown sewing. They did a variety of things. They would help nurses in stations and on and on. And this is one of my absolute favorites. You are looking at the champion Peach Pit girls of Washington, D.C. And look at their sign. You save peach seeds, they will save soldiers' lives. Peaches? Peach seeds? Well, as many of you know, I'm sure, the Germans were using all kinds of toxic gas in World War I that we had not encountered. And you had to wear a mask to be safe. And evidently, a couple of pounds of peach pits or shells from nuts could be used to create the carbon for the masks that the soldiers were using. And so they had contests all over the country to see who could collect the most peach pits. And these girls were the champions in Washington, D.C. Herbert Hoover at that time was head of the Food Administration, which was in charge of getting Americans to have wheatless days and meatless days and eat more beans by all means. And he actually sent letters to Juliette Low. I know they're hard to read, but perhaps you can make out some of the one on the right. The work accomplished by the Girl Scouts last year in production of vegetables from home gardens and in picking, canning, preserving, and drying of fruit and vegetables has been a material benefit in solving the problem of food distributions. Very last paragraph, the Girl Scouts can be a big factor in assisting in the work of the Food Administration, and I'm glad to take this opportunity to express my appreciation. Now, Herbert Hoover at this point is, as I said, head of the Food Administration, and there are these wonderful letters that he wrote to Juliette Low to thank the efforts of the Girl Scouts. And here she is with 2 scouts in the early years. And this is Girl Scout Troop number 1, 1917. She's on the far right. And here are the local and national officers in 1918. The organization is growing by leaps and bounds. And when she stepped down as president, it was her friends and relatives who stepped into the spot. And this is a photo of her goddaughter, Anne, who became Mrs. Arthur Choate, and she was the 2nd president of the Girl Scouts. Now, here is an amazing piece of jewelry. During the war began the involvement of first ladies. And some of you may not be aware of this, but first ladies have been very enmeshed with the Girl Scouts. It all began during the war when Juliette asked First Lady Edith Wilson if she would come to the annual convention and present the badge that Girl Scouts had earned. The highest badge at that time, it was called a service award, and you had to, quote, knit 2 pounds of wool, or make 50 jars of jam, or sell at least 10 Liberty bonds, and then you got a badge. So Edith Wilson came to the Girl Scout convention, and she presented the badge. And then she was asked to serve as honorary president, and she accepted. As a token of her thanks, Juliette Low presented her with this. And you can see the Girl Scout logo. We're talking about emeralds, a ruby, and a diamond. And this was what Edith Wilson got from taking part with the Girl Scouts. And it continued after the war. The person you're looking at here is Grace Coolidge, First Lady Grace Coolidge. And she also was accepted to be honorary president of the Girl Scouts. And the Boston Globe, and you all know Boston is my hometown, had a front page article about her eating a cookie. And there she is with the cookie on the left. Let's see. No, I'll go back here. There is a photo and also a Babe Ruth having a cookie. And this was a big deal. Now, the cookies at that time were not the cookies of today. This is the magazine from the Girl Scouts called The American Girl. It was initially called The Rally. But today, under the current cookie program, the sales generally benefit local troops. That was not the case early on. The American Girl magazine published a recipe and marketing tips in 1922 because they wanted to sell 1 million cookies to pay for their new national headquarters in New York. And their goal was just over $400,000. Now, for those of you who like to bake, here is the original Girl Scout cookie recipe. And this was the one that was published in the original magazine, and it's essentially butter cookies, no chocolate, I'm sad to say. But if you look at the bottom, cookies large and small, made by Scouts, both short and tall. What's your order? Phone us quick so that we may do the trick. 30 cents is all we ask, and we find it no task to deliver to your door dozens, 1, 2, 3 or more. So it was a fundraiser initially to help build the new headquarters. And here's Grace Coolidge. I'm throwing this in because I was a campfire girl, not a Girl Scout. So if you're wondering, there was another organization called the Campfire Girls. And of course, because they were called Campfire Girls, they adopted Native American dress. I suspect they're not happy about this part of their history. But Grace Coolidge, even though she was honorary president of the Girl Scouts, she met with the Campfire Girls. Now, this is the woman who really took her involvement with the Girl Scouts seriously. You're looking at First Lady Lou Henry Hoover. First Lady Lou Henry Hoover was a remarkable woman in her own right. She's the first woman to graduate with a geology degree from Stanford, and she was proficient in many languages and really very, very accomplished. Well, she loved the outdoors. And so she was interested in the Girl Scouts from the very beginning. And she was on their board early on, very early on, because she believed that the Girl Scouts inculcated traits that she thought were important in young women. And so when she became First Lady, then, of course, she was honorary president of the Girl Scouts. And it is under her leadership that the Girl Scouts really become more expansive and more organized and more efficient and more attuned to fundraising. She wanted the Girl Scouts to be self-supporting. And she is the one who oversaw the transition from the original magazine called The Rally to the American Girl. That was the new Girl Scout magazine. She held conferences to talk about Girl Scout strategy. She led a troop of her own, which is very interesting. And she, by the 1930s, she said, you know, your focus now needs to be on volunteerism because of the Great Depression. And here she is with a troop on the White House lawn. And this was her project. It's something called the Little House. Now, I don't know how many of you are former Girl Scouts, but you may have grown up in a city where there was a Little House. The Little House was built originally in 1923 behind the White House. It was a project of Better Homes and Gardens and the General Federation of Women's Clubs. The idea was to build this little model house where people could see the latest in appliances and homemaking and all of that. And it attracted a lot of visitors. Well, by 1923, the end of 1923, the show was over. What were they going to do with the Little House? First Lady Lou Hoover had an idea. The idea was that the Girl Scouts should purchase and move the Little House and use that as a showcase for their various skills. Okay, great idea. It is very expensive to move a house. And she took up her pen and wrote to the members of the Girl Scout board and tried to convince them. She bombarded them with arguments, and they said, no, we can't afford it. Well, Lou Hoover was not a woman who took no for an answer. So she called up her friends, and she got one of them to donate, really loan a parcel of land on New York Avenue. And then she said, I have found people who will pay for the expenses of moving the house. The person she found was herself, but she didn't want people to know that. It cost, we'd have to translate this into current dollars, it cost $12,000 to move the house and then put in the electrical connections and all that. But they did. They moved the house to New York Avenue, where it was kind of a draw for the Girl Scouts almost for 50 years. And here is Grace Coolidge laying the cornerstone while Lou Hoover in her Girl Scout uniform looks on. And the Little House became a mecca for people to visit. Here's Lou Hoover in the kitchen. You all remember stoves like that? I do. And here we've got Eleanor Roosevelt, who couldn't even boil an egg, visiting the kitchen. And Eleanor Roosevelt planting a tree at the Little House for Better Homes Week. And foreign dignitaries who came to Washington would visit the Little House. So here we have Norway's Crown Princess Martha, as she had come to visit the Little House. The idea caught on, and little houses were built all over the country. Here's a very cute one in Shelby, Ohio. And for those of you who are from Florida, this is the South Miami Little House, which was built at the behest of the troop down there, which I believe was called Alligator Trail #1. That was the Miami troop of Girl Scouts. So this began, as I said, a tradition of first ladies being involved with the Girl Scouts. And every single one of them since has been honorary president. Here's a wonderful photo of Eleanor Roosevelt with the Girl Scouts in Lexington, Kentucky, and we've got one Boy Scout at the end. I think people forget how tall Eleanor Roosevelt was. She was one of our tallest first ladies, and she tends to tower over people in these photographs. And here they are at the Girl Scouts 25th anniversary, and Lou Hoover to the right. Amy Carter was a Girl Scout, and there she is with a birthday cake. And Rosalind Carter, and it's not surprising, actually led her own troop. So you have President Jimmy Carter writing. For 1980, Rosalind and I wish each of you continuing success in the worthwhile activities by which you enrich our American way of life. Our young people are the best hope for our future, and you represent the finest qualities of today's young citizens. We applaud your sense of civic responsibility, patriotism, your strength of character, and your selfless involvement in efforts that advance the well-being of our communities. We pray that God may continue to guide you in these endeavors. A wonderful letter from Jimmy Carter. And here's Michelle Obama. They had a Girl Scouts camp out on the White House lawn in 2015. Now, what did Juliette Gordon Low do after World War I? After World War I, she went back to England and became very, very interested in expanding the international scope of girls' organizations. And so she went back and forth constantly between England and the United States. And girl guides, or chapters of Girl Scouts, started to spread all around the world. And for her efforts, the Girl Guides of England gave her that Silver Fish Award. You can, if you look closely, you'll see it on the necklace she was wearing. And there are only a few Americans who have ever gotten that. She had stepped down as president of the Girl Scouts, and she, as I said, focused internationally. And look at this. There is a World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, 150 countries have Girl Scouting organizations representing 10 million girls and women. These are the latest figures. So I think that Juliette Gordon Low would be very pleased at this, because she really, in her last years, focused on having an international organization. Her last years were difficult. Remember, I said that she was hard of hearing from an early childhood bout with an ear infection. Well, strangely enough, at her wedding, people had thrown rice, and one of those rice kernels had lodged in her ear. And after her honeymoon, it had to be surgically removed. And of course, techniques in 1886 were not like surgical techniques today. And so essentially, it left her just about deaf in one ear. And that it got worse as she got older. Not only that, she came down with breast cancer, which she hid from her friends and family, and had several surgeries and various treatments, including injection of lead and all. So she had been in Switzerland in the fall of 1926, and she came back and died in early January 1927. So if you think about it, she only had 15 years, really, to create this incredible organization, and she did. Of course, she has been honored in many ways. There was a stamp, 3 cents. Do any of us remember that? 1948. Stamp in her honor. Rather grim looking stamp, I think. Here's her first day issue of postage. The Georgia State Capitol has a bust of Juliette Low, and at that point, Jimmy Carter was governor, and he unveiled it, and there's Amy, also a Girl Scout there. I love this. If you go to Savannah, you can take a ferry, and they're called the Savannah Bells Ferry, and one of them is named after her, the Juliette Gordon Low Ferry. And of course, there are tons of books. Now, the one on the left, yes, your left, Stacy Corduroy, is considered the most definitive biography. She's a historian who delved deeply into Gordon Low, and Juliette Gordon Low, and she's the one who said that the marriage was the worst decision she thinks she made. And then there were all these books for children about her. First Girl Scout, lady from Savannah. And of course, the cookies. I started with the cookies, so of course I have to say something more about the cookies. I was interested in this whole phenomenon of cookie sales. You realize hundreds and thousands of girls are involved in it, and they make millions of dollars in these cookie sales. And if you go on the Girl Scout website and ask about the cookies, this is what they say, and they're quite serious about it. In the cookie program, girls learn 5 essential skills. It's the largest girl-led entrepreneurial program in the world. So girls learn goal setting, how to create goals and create a plan to reach them. They learn decision making. They learn money management, how to create a budget and handle money. And they find their voice and build confidence through customer interactions. They learn to act ethically, both in business and life. And so they take the cookie sales, the Girl Scouts take the cookie sales not as a frivolous endeavor, but something that will help to empower girls and teach them certain skills. Now, Florida, of course, has any number of Girl Scout troops. I mean, there's one here in Gainesville, although we're part of the Gateway Council, which is located in Jacksonville. And I was curious about the Florida one. And so I found something called the State of the Florida Girl Report. The goal of this report is to raise awareness about the well-being of girls all over the state. Girl Scouts is an organization of choice to prepare girls for life in the real world. Today, Girl Scouts are also committed to improving the world for real girls. While the depth of our experience proves the undeniable potential of girls and women, it confirms that girls and boys have a uniquely different experience growing up in our communities. Hear, hear. Absolutely. And look at this. This is in the State of Florida report from the Girl Scouts, and I myself was taken aback. 1 in 6 high school girls report experience sexual violence. 40%, 46% of female K through 12 students do not perform on grade level in math. 1 in 8 female students miss at least one day of class because they don't feel safe. 2 times as many girls seriously consider attempting suicide compared to boys. 8% fewer female students declare a science or engineering major. The one place where girls excel shouldn't surprise you, the high school graduation rate. But over 50% of girls experience depression symptoms. And this is what the Girl Scouts of Florida hope to address in the coming years. It is very contemporary and shows how Girl Scouts have evolved from outdoor and homemaking skills to address contemporary 21st century problems of young girls. And here are the pillars today. STEM, we all know about that. Science, technology, engineering, and math. STEM skills critical. And they talk about women being half of the workforce, but only 27% of STEM jobs. And the Girl Scouts encourages STEM programs to encourage girls to go into science, technology, and engineering and increase their confidence. Entrepreneurship, we've talked a little bit about how that is tied to the cookie program. Life skills, healthy living, civic engagement, strong relationship with family and peers, advocating on behalf of others. And outdoors, Girl Scouts has a long and storied history of getting every girl outdoors. That's still part of it. So they've got camping trips and all kinds of activities that make girls familiar with the outdoors. So if you think about Girl Scouts and associate them just with cookies, you are missing the bigger picture. What has impressed me so much in doing this talk was the evolution from the early years to today. And I close with President Barack Obama's statement when he posthumously awarded Low the Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor that anyone can get. And this is what he said. Growing up in Georgia in the late 1800s, Juliette Gordon Low was not exactly typical. She flew airplanes, she went swimming, she experimented with electricity for fun. And she recognized early on that in order to keep up with the changing times, women would have to be prepared. So at age 52, after meeting the founder of the Boy Scouts in England, she came home, she called her cousin, and there's the famous quote, "We're going to start this tonight." A century later, almost 60 million Girl Scouts have gained leadership skills and self-confidence through the organization that she founded. They include CEOs, astronauts, my own Secretary of State, and from the very beginning, they have also included girls of different races and faiths and abilities, just the way Juliette would have wanted it. He awarded the Medal of Freedom to Richard Platt, who was a great nephew. An artist, athlete, trailblazer for America's daughters, Juliette Gordon Low founded an organization to teach young women self-reliance and resourcefulness. A century later, during the Year of the Girl Scouts, more than 3 million are leaders in their communities and are translating new skills into successful careers. Americans of all backgrounds continue to draw inspiration from Juliette Gordon Low's remarkable vision, and we celebrate her dedication to empowering girls everywhere. A very nice tribute from Barack Obama, and I think it says it all. She was an unusual woman, a woman who would not have predicted to go down this path. But think about it, the fact that she was unencumbered, essentially, and had influential friends and family and an income of her own allowed her to follow a passion, and that passion was the Girl Scouts of America. Thank you so much for listening, and questions? Okay, I'm sure we have former Girl Scouts sitting here.
Girl Scouts?
Oh,
Girl
yeah.
Scouts? Yep, yep.
Okay.
Questions from the audience.
And I have a workbook from 1980 used by a Girl Scout, and it is very interesting to look at the various categories and how girls would use it. So I have this if anyone would like to look at it.
I have a question about the brownies. Did you uncover anything about the brownies? Aren't they an offshoot of the
Yes, well, as they developed
babies that
the
needed
the
something?
babies, different age groups, yes.
But
Yeah.
She had nothing to do with that, I guess.
No, it was done, let's see, I'm not sure whether it was done while she was alive or afterward. I didn't see any reference to the brownies. So that's an interesting, I'll have to follow up. I honestly don't know whether it was started in that 15 years or it came later as they expanded. Because what is the age group of the brownies? It's younger than what she had in mind. Yeah. Another question?
Yes, thank you so much. That was a really fabulous talk. I remember as a Girl Scout with my sash and all the badges and everything. And is that something that got started immediately, the whole badge earning system, or is that something that developed, with time?
Yes, the badges started, but they have been added to. She started, remember, she asked Edith Wilson to give the first badge.
Right. And so I was wondering if you knew, with the evolution of what the Girl Scouts are um, fostering now, like if there were some new badges now that would be interesting to hear about.
Yeah, I don't know. I would say Google it and see if there are new badges. I mean, their logo has changed. The uniform is still very recognizable, isn't it? I mean, the uniform is still very recognizable.
Barbara,
Yes.
Don McLaughlin here. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation as always. In the early 70s, I and a couple of music faculty members at UF were involved in helping to plan the production of an opera about Juliette Gordon Low called Daisy. Did you come across that in any of your research? It was premiered in Miami, I think, in 1974, 75.
I did not, Don.
Diversity in 1912 in Savannah, Georgia is a little bit surprising because it seems to have been racially inclusive from the beginning. Do you have any writings about the tensions and how that continued to evolve to the present day?
Yes, it's a good question. There are some articles on the first Black troops within the Girl Scouts, and they seem to have started in northern cities. But she was very firm on the idea that anybody who wanted to be a Girl Scout could be a Girl Scout. But I think initially there were separate Black troops of Girl Scouts, and then they became integrated. So the information I found was on, as I said, northern cities and not in Savannah itself. Because of course, Savannah was still very segregated in the early 20th century.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Three sort of questions. One, when I was young, they called it a bluebird, little blue skirts, red vest, white blouse, and it was the equivalent of the brownies, but was to the Girl Guides, perhaps, or maybe the Campfire Girls. Campfire? Okay. And then I was wondering if proportionately there are less Girl Scouts nowadays. When I was a Girl Scout, almost all my friends were Girl Scouts and everything, but I just don't hear about it as much now. And does there tend to be more of perhaps the girls who are more religious going into Girl Scouts? And then I was wondering, is Melania the honorary chair?
No, answer the last question first, but actually, from what I read, Jill Biden never stepped into that role. And I'm kind of surprised at that. I have to double check it. And I'm not sure I got all of the second part of your question. Were you asking about religion? More religious. Well, it does say, service to God, but it's non-sectarian, and I don't think they give anybody a test, So now, if you go on the Campfire Girls website, they will say we are inclusive, and that means Girl Scouts who are gay, Girl Scouts with different views on gender. I'm sorry, girls with different views on gender. The Campfire website says that specifically, The Girl Scouts just says all inclusive, everybody welcome. They don't spell it out as, and I've never heard of anybody being rejected as a Girl Scout. Oh, then huge. The numbers are still huge, hundreds and thousands. Yeah.
I was wondering what some of my granddaughters are in the Boy Scouts now, or in the Scouts. You know, the girls have been invited to join them. And I wondered how the Girl Scouts were taking that, if anybody knows. And, you know, and when I was a Girl Scout for a long time, but when I got to high school, there were no Jewish Girl Scout troops, and the churches they met on Saturday and stuff like that, but Girl Scouts came through. They made me a Girl Scout at large, and I reported to the main office. You know, they don't give up.
Yeah, no. It's interesting that the Campfire Girls are now Campfire USA, and they are boys and girls. But the Girl Scouts so far have maintained their identity, and I suspect they will. Yes, yeah.
Thank you
Ben?
very much. That was a great talk, as always. Question about the fundraising. Does part of that money that local troops raise go back to the umbrella organization, or how
You
does
mean
that?
to the national
To the national.
organization? I don't know that, Len. I
Just
suspect
wondering
it
about
does.
Mhm.
But, I didn't come across anything that said they were having financial troubles.
Oh, that's good.
And I don't know whether that's another interesting thing I'd have to check. Did she leave them an endowment,
Uh-huh.
from her estate? I mean, what happened? I wonder if that's part of their endowment, their foundation.
Any other
Okay.
questions? Another question? Okay.
In the 1970s, a friend and I, oh, sorry. In the 1970s, a friend and I started a Girl Scout troop for black girls and white girls together. And we had it for 4 years, and then one of us moved, but we went camping. We did all the Girl Scouty things, and it was a wonderful experience. But I haven't read anything or heard anything about Girl Scouting for a long time. Where have I been?
Well, there is something called the Gateway Council that's in Jacksonville. And here in Gainesville, there is
We
a
have
Girl Scout Awards to
and-
people in the community who've
Good.
contributed. Yeah.
Good. Well, I may have just run back here holding that.
Hi, Barbara. It's Don again. Have you been aware of the major class action lawsuit that's just been filed against the Girl Scouts because they found heavy metals in the cookies?
No.
Yeah, it's been in the news just the last day or two. It's a big deal, really.
Really? And we've got the cookies on the back table, so. I did not see that. I did not. Was that in a? Okay, I'll have to check on that. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
So she wanted to know was what merged into some degree. Down here, most people are talking about it, so.
Yeah.
You know.
I don't, They have not met, they have not merged from Jana Christie.